Good morning. My name is Christina Woolston, and I have the honor of leading the first panel. But first, I would like to, before we call the members up to the stage, I have the distinct honor and with great sadness to recognize and follow with a brief moment of silence for the late Arlister Jalewski, who was a fierce leader and champion of Alaska. Many of us knew her personally. I remember growing up. I remember when she ran for governor more than once. And what a historic moment that was as a young woman growing up in rural Alaska. Just a few remarks about her life. Arliss was first elected to the Anchorage Assembly and then served the city in the Alaska State Senate from 1978 to 1993. In 1986, she became the first Alaska woman to head the ticket for a major political party's gubernatorial campaign. It was very feisty. Her work was instrumental for inflation proofing for the Permanent Fund and establishing the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, two significant pieces of legislation and finance and oversight for some of Alaska's most vulnerable citizens, and we thank her for that. She was in the first class to be inducted to the Alaska Women's Hall of Fame in 2009. Arliss was a mother, a grandmother, and a friend to all Alaska. If you would please bow your head for a moment. Thank you. Arliss would have loved this conference, the coming together of all of these passionate people about Alaska and the Arctic and all the things that we can accomplish together. And so in the spirit of that, I'd like to welcome to the stage the panel today. Calling up, please, Representative Josiah Patkatuk with the Alaska State Legislature. Mr. Hugh Patkatuk, President and CEO of Alunic Corporation. Mr. Aaron Shutt, President and CEO of Doyon Limited. And Ms. Elizabeth Segulik Hensley, who is the Vice President of External and Government Affairs for NANA. John Lincoln could not be with us today, and we also apologize that Minister Broberg with Greenland was unable to make it. Fascinating turn of events. They had a government change, and he was unable to join us this week. So thank you very much, and we will get started with the panel. The protocol today is that we will, if it's red, it's hot. There you go. I think you're on. And I'm sorry some of you can't see us through this podium here, but we should be, there we go, we're on the screen, so you're all set. My name is Christina Woolston. I'm the head of external affairs for Donlin Gold. I'm originally from the community of Naknek, where my parents still reside. I'm a shareholder with Bristol Bay Native Corporation and Pavik Village Corporation, and a tribal member of the Naknek Native Village Council. It's been my great pleasure to know many of the folks on this panel for a number of years. Their dedication and leadership and resource development in our communities is pretty astonishing, and we're lucky to have them all. I'm going to get right into the questions because we have limited time. We have about 30 minutes for our discussion, and then we will be accepting Q&A from the audience. So please feel free to provide those questions to the conference organizers. The first question will be for all of you. What Arctic resource development efforts are you presently working on, and what does the future of those projects look like? I'll start with you, Representative.
Hello, here we are. Tusawnakpa. Yeah, I mean, can you hear me? As Christina said, my name is Josiah Patkatuk. I'm from Barrow, Alaska, and we got the same last name, and unlike some other people that got same last names across the world, there is a relation. He's my uncle. You asked about resource development projects that we're working on. I get to chair the House Resources Committee in the Alaska State Legislature and have broadened my understanding of different resource development aspects to the state of Alaska, including logging and fisheries, mining. I come from a community that relies heavily upon oil and gas development. And so some of those projects that are in front of us, specifically to the Arctic and District 40, is the MPRA development as oil and gas moves westward from the Prudhoe Bay area. There's also the Anwar development to the east of Prudhoe Bay. And little note there, my grandpa was born, I think, on track 23 of Anwar, so in relation to the aspect of who we are, where we come from, and as Rex mentioned earlier, we've been here thousands of years and we'll be here for thousands of more years, so you always have to deal with us, whether it's a Putkadak or some other family. So those are the oil and gas developments that are ahead of us. Over to the west in the Nana region, which the fellow that gave the prayer this morning, Walter, he's from. They've got the Red Dog mine, which has been in operation for a number of years and has been a proven success for that partnership between the local organizations and industry who's coming to extract the resource. And I think it's a good example of the risk that's there, striking the balance and making sure that there are winners across the board for the stakeholders. And to that point, the future of some of the development on the west side is the Ambler mine, which has been talked a lot about recently, just considering some actions from DC. So those are kind of the projects specific to District 40 that are out there. There's a bunch of other resource development projects across the state, Donlin Gold being one of them, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Kinross and the Fort Knox mine and their extension over into the Manh Choh project and the tribal land of Tetlin people. So we've got a bunch of resources, and I mean, it's my opinion that those are the tools that we use to insulate ourselves from poverty, and I'll stand on that until until the end. So that's my spiel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm so thankful to be able to stand before you, or should I say sit before you. I appreciate Rex's comments earlier. I'm very thankful for that. You know, for the people that have brought us to the table, especially Rachel. I don't know where she's sitting at, but there were some, you know, having first participated in one of the first arenas for this encounter. I'm very thankful for that, and with all the participants here. And for us to be sitting on the table today, I'd like to think that we are standing on our resources, which we have been for a long time. And you know, I usually ask, what country do we live in? You know, when that tells you is the ability for us to be able to work together. And like what I said lately was like a long while ago was, we really can't have our head in the iceberg. You know, we really can make a difference all together on the table. I'm thankful for my nephew Josiah here, thankful for the participants here. You know, I take this personally for us as resource development. You know, our Lona Corporation, our interest in Arctic resource development are personal, having lived that personal side of the world, having observed it from the air, from its growth. Our home village in Wainwright on the northmost coast of Alaska. Several years ago, we acquired a dual-line site. You know, having said that, you know, where I've seen it grow, and having been part of the national security and seen it firsthand, his dad was part of that group, and I'm so thankful for that. It provides industry or government institution on campus close to the village, and that's the differentiating between living in a village and having to observe it, kind of like an industrial area. And that's a unique sight to see. I'll give you a real brief story about that one. You know, I used to see my dad go out to work with a dog team. That used to tug my heart. And we loved to go see him just to see the advancement of how we were living back then. I saw a picture up there where really a good way to remind us where we come from. A young girl getting some water, picking up off the ice. What a way to ground us, you know, remind us where we come from. Resource development. You have access to established village services, but can also control access to your work site. As a corporation, we work in successful partnership with Department of Defense, NOAA, Coast Guard, and BLM. I'm very thankful for that. What it took was building relationships all across. You know, having to get to know people that make decisions, that help make us decisions, assist us, and we in turn return that. Waynard has hosted resource development companies which are Arctic interests over the years, most notably Shell. I think everybody remembers Shell. Back then when it was so exciting to be able to sit on a table, dancing with oil companies, put it that way. But it was actually really fun, engaging. What are the possibilities? What's next? Just like flying, what's next? What's next? What we bring to the resource development conversations are local expertise, as well as our willingness to work with global partners on complex multi-year projects in challenging conditions. Like what ASRC has done, we look to them also. And having said that, and I'm so thankful to be able to verify where we work at times, where we have, coming from a village corporation really has made a difference in all of us. The ability to bless our people whom we represent. Not only that, our employees also. Like how we put to them was like, how can I invest in you to make a difference in our lives? No one knows the Arctic like the people who have made it their home for generations. Thank you, Rex, for bringing that to the table also. And in Wainwright, we see opportunity for wraparound support of resource development projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCutcheon Sr. Elizabeth, welcome. You are with Nana, and for many who don't know, Elizabeth comes from ANCSA royalty to some degree. Her father, Willie Hensley, was one of the most prominent leaders in the ANCSA history and the passage of ANCSA back in 1971. Tell us what Nana is up to in resource development.
Okay, uvlalotak. Okay. Good morning. Thank you for welcoming me onto the panel. Hello to my fellow co-panelists. Good morning. John Lincoln, our president and CEO, sends his regards. He was unable to attend for reasons outside of his control. So he says, good morning. He wishes he were here. I hope everybody's feeling energized after the festivities yesterday and inspired. For me personally, it's just great to see people, human beings, other humans. It's amazing. And I'm just acknowledge that it's been a really tough couple of years, and so it's just so wonderful to see everybody, and really to know that, we're survivors, all of us sitting here. I'm really grateful to Walter for his opening prayer and to Rex for laying the groundwork for what ANCSA is. And I want to acknowledge that there are numerous of my own elders in the room here, and community leaders from my region and from, across the Arctic. So I want to acknowledge you all. I also want to acknowledge Chief Gary Harrison, who I saw earlier, of the Aklutna tribe. It's a blessing to be here on Dena'ina land. And, we thank them for their stewardship over the last 10,000 years. So ANCSA. ANCSA changed our lives. I went to law school because I wanted to understand that law, which had changed the identity of our people in a lot of significant ways. Prior to ANCSA, our people would often say, I'm a Kikiktarumi. I'm from Kikiktaruk. I'm from the place that's almost an island. After that, people would say, I'm from Nana. And I wanted to understand what is the power of this law that helped, changed our identities in some very significant ways. And the magnitude of ANCSA, it's been that strong. Our leaders selected our lands for multiple reasons, including hunting and fishing, gathering sites, cultural sites, and also for economic development. Our ancestral lands, of course, encompassed an area much greater than what Alaska Native people eventually got title to. We got title to about a tenth of our ancestral homelands. But we did select those lands for very specific purposes. And I want to acknowledge Walter again, because for many decades, he worked to get our land secured. He worked that issue for 30 years and was very successful in getting Nana title to our homelands. So I want to express my thank you to Walter for his work. So we, as I mentioned, we manage our lands primarily for hunting and fishing. That's the most critical component of our stewardship because of the spiritual, nutritional, cultural values that brings to us. You can't separate us from our lands regardless of where we are in the world. And then economic development. We knew, and our leadership knew when they were selecting our lands, that we needed to be able to provide for ourselves. And that's what ANCSA was all about. It was about how can we position ourselves to succeed with our own resources so that we can come to the table as partners. And so we've got, as Representative Bakotak said, we've developed the Red Dog Mine starting in 1989. And that only came after many, many meetings in the communities and our shareholders, which we've got 15,000 now, our shareholders saying, yes, we want this mine. That was only after that consultation, that critical consultation. And some of the pictures where people are raising their hands to vote in support of that mine are really inspiring to me. It's like there they were saying, this is what we want as a people. So we've got the Red Dog Mine, which produces 80% of the United States zinc production. We've got 700 shareholder jobs there this year. We've gotten about $2.6 billion in royalties from the Red Dog Mine to NANA as the landowner. And we've shared $1.6 billion through the ANCSA 7I revenue sharing provision, which I think is something to note here in Alaska. You know, we share our wealth with the other ANCSA corporations. So we're really, you know, Val Davidson yesterday mentioned the tribal health system taking care of everybody. You know, we share, it's part of our value system. So we continue to operate the Red Dog Mine with our partner Tech, and it's got about a 10-year mine life left. And so we are really looking to the future and building that bridge to a sustainable future. The Red Dog Mine provides about 85% of our borough base budget, and so we have to plan for the future. Who is going to pay for our government? Who is going to pay for schools? Who's going to provide public safety? We've got to plan for our future, and we are in the process of doing that. I think there might be another question about future projects, so I'll leave that for there. So we're currently really heading toward the end of our Red Dog Mine operations and looking to new parts of that area to develop, as well as the Upper Kobuk. So I think I'll stop there, but I just really want to emphasize that, you know, as Indigenous peoples, we do have under international law many different international human rights law instruments, like the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, etc. We have the right to economic development and to equitably participate in economies. And to us, based on our Inupiat values, we do that in a way that works for our people and that upholds our values of sharing, collaboration, cooperation. So thanks very much, and I'm going to pass the mic on over to Mr. Shutt.
Thanks, Liz. Great to see everyone. Excuse me. My name's Aaron Shutt. I am president of Doyon. We're another regional corporation. Excuse me. We're the interior people, so everyone else on this panel is from the coast. And I grew up as far from the coast about as possible in Alaska and Tok in the eastern interior. I've been blessed in my career to work with many in this room, and even am on the rock crew whaling sometimes with my friend Rex. And as Liz said, we work collaboratively collaboratively on many things in this state. But let me give our guests a little understanding of my region, which is the largest, geographically the largest region. We're in the interior. Our region is about the size of the country of France. Within that, Doyon owns 12.5 million acres, so about 10% of our original land area in the interior, like other regions. But 12.5 million acres, for those that are from the eastern United States, that's about New Hampshire and Vermont put together, the whole 2 states Doyon owns. But it's really spread out over this very large region, and our communities are very small. So in that whole area the size of France, if you exclude the urban area of Fairbanks, there may be 20,000 people. We don't even have a whole House seat in the state legislature. So I know we don't have 18,000 because that's the redistricting.
I got your back.
All right. And to the point of what ANCSA was and what it means in resource development, it was in part envisioned by the Congress that ANCSA corporations would sustain themselves through resource development. So like NANA and like ASRC, Doyon, when it selected us 12.5 million acres, we started with our communities and our subsistence needs and cultural needs near our communities, but we also selected somewhere in the range of 4 to 6 million acres for resource potential, which is a very large area. And people back then did so much with so little. They identified a lot of very prospective areas within our large region. So right now, Doyon has active mineral exploration programs for gold and copper in 5 locations, spread all over our region from very close to where I grew up to the far southwest portion of our region near the Chalista border, and then all the way up in the Wiseman area right on the border with ASRC. So we have things going on all over the region in gold exploration and other minerals. We have an active oil and gas exploration program on 1.6 million acres in the Yukon Flats. That's about 100 miles northeast of Fairbanks. We have a very large voluntary forest carbon offset program that we will take to market here in the next couple of months, and we'll be doing another very large program here this summer in another part of our region. We also have, as the landowner, very large sand, gravel, and rock programs that support civil infrastructure across the region, both with the State Department of Transportation, but also our communities. And it sometimes is a lot more work for us than what we get out of it, but it's such an important component of how ANCSA corporations support their communities, their shareholders, and the state as we face this infrastructure gap across the region. So we've done a lot. We intend to do a lot more in the coming years, and very glad to be here today.
Well, Aaron, you're kind of on a roll, so I'm going to reverse the order and start with you again for the next question. This session is going by very quickly, and we want to allow for some Q&A publicly with the audience. So there are many global and local factors that impact resource development. We're seeing them unfold every day right now across the world. What does the future of resource development look like in the NANA region with your partners, and what are the impacts and benefits to your Indigenous shareholders?
That's a big question, obviously. I'm going to focus on a couple things. And one is the importance of the growth and sophistication of native corporations vis-a-vis when initial exploration and development started. We were new, we were much smaller, we didn't have the expertise. These days, we're active participants, sometimes investors, both in our region and sometimes investors in infrastructure that would support developments in other regions and across the state, both on state land and potentially on other native corporation land. And we work closely with NANA, for example, on the Ambler Access Project. And that is very important. As everyone on this panel said, we care more about our own land than anyone else does. And we will protect that land as best we can while we create economies that support our shareholders and communities in our state. So that growth has put us in a position where we have power. We have political power, we have financial power, we have industry power, and we are using it. I think we're going to use it even more as we participate in future development.
Yeah, that was a big question, so maybe I'll answer part of it. You know, we are optimistic about the future. We've got 15,000 shareholders, and, you know, their talents, skills, and the heart they have for our people is inspiring. And what we do is to benefit our shareholders and to benefit our region. Ultimately, what we do benefits the state and the nation as well. We're optimistic. We continue to work with our really strong partners in industry, other ANCs as well. We are excited to be looking at new prospects within the Red Dog Mine area. We're excited about the interactions with our communities on those discussions and making sure that things work for our people and that their subsistence areas are protected. We are very excited about the Ambler Access Project that he just mentioned. That, you know, is a bridge to the future. We're building that bridge to the future. So some of you may have seen some articles and whatnot about the Ambler Access Project. There's a proposed road which has got a environmental impact statement, a joint record of decision issued by the Department of Interior, and our board, you know, is excited about that process. We're excited about looking at what that road might look like in the future, and multiple tribes in our region and other regional organizations are also looking at that proposed road and wanting to, you know, really flesh out what does that mean for our region, what does that look like, because as my colleague here said, our people know what's best for our region. One of our challenges is people from elsewhere saying, that's the wilderness. You need to keep that the wilderness. You need to keep the minerals in the ground. You need to, you know, don't engage in that responsible economic development. And that's a challenge for us because our communities know best. Our people know best. And who is going to take care of us if not us? We know that historically, for example, the Indian Health Service provides 50% of the resources necessary to actually provide health care in Native communities. So while the government may have responsibilities to us, you know, it's an effort, a major effort to actually have those responsibilities fulfilled to what they need to be. So we've got to be at the table. We have to make decisions for ourselves. And that's what we're trying to do. And we view that conversation with our tribes, our hunters, our culture bearers, you know, and other stakeholders as a critical part of that process. And we definitely need to be at the table and are at the table in those processes.
Thank you for mentioning the up-and-coming projects. It's really exciting to see what's happening in Alaska. Hugh, what does the future of Alunic look like from your perspective?
You know, it really forces us to think about the future, how it impacts. And having said that, you know, you have to come to realize that you're standing on resources, and it's like what I love to hear. Come have a seat on our table, and let's figure this out together. You know, I've seen firsthand of the development from the air. I have lived as a search and rescue pilot. I've seen the impacts from, you know, from how Dead Horse was growing, going west and going to the east toward Anwar. I've seen it firsthand. I have participated from the ground also. And I like to think that from a very simple observation that helps us understand the impacts and opportunities. Like, I would ask a very simple question. What do you see when you see the sea? What do you see this? What do you see? People tell me seals, water, or something. And from my perspective, I see a maritime system from its opportunity. Can you become a Coast Guard captain? What do you see when you see the sky? You know, for me, I see a national airspace system. And when you look at the land, look at what we're surrounded by. Boundaries. Each one has different sets of regulations. I'm just trying to provide a situational awareness of where I'm coming from. And it's really good to have a good situational awareness when you approach, you know, resource development up here. and even throughout our region. Because we deal with it we have participated from a national security point of view, and everyone I think that has a direct impact one way or the other, like oil, for example. You know, having said that, we definitely do need it also. So when I look toward a future of resource development, what benefits my community? I like to think that we can build our future and build professional folks from a region. You know, we're starting to grow, I'm so thankful for that, and have some proper representation all across the board. Representatives of education, representatives from the state. And having said that, we like to think that we can have a good, very, very good situational awareness each and every day that provides us the ability to support infrastructure in the future. We hear that a lot lately. Okay, and having said that, we have proper toolboxes like our companies when we look at our hands. Like, for example, some of us as environmental companies, construction, we are well aware of that. You know, having seen development in the past, I'm so thankful to be able to see a picture earlier where a young girl was getting water off the ice. I've been there, done that. And having seen that, where we participated in Cold War up north, we used to wonder about what we see up in the sky. Something coming out of the west or north, and I see something going up and another one coming out of the south. It was jets intercepting the Russian ones. That used to be a unique sight. What in the world are those? You know, dark, you can't really hear nothing, but you could kind of hear the whispering of the jet back then. That was unique to hear a long time ago. You know, for us, resource development really does bring economic development in our regions, the impacts of it. And for the reason why I brought the situational awareness earlier is because it provides an opportunity to see what we can become. Thanks to the way we were raised at times, it gives an opportunity, what can I become? I got a good example right here. Having said that, that's where for us, you know, it really goes back home, where it can develop what we want to see. Thank you.
Representative Packatuck, you have a unique position in that you are from the communities, you are, you know the impacts and the benefits of resource development, and now you get to be a part of a body of legislators in Juneau that help to shape our policy and some of our laws around how we develop those resources in Alaska. What do you see as the future of resource development in Alaska?
So before I attack the question of the future, I think it's important to look at the past and how we've harnessed our resources for more than 100 years. And I'm not talking just oil and gas and mining. I'm talking about the renewable resources of our fish and game and how we've had those economies through demand globally. You look at the opportunities that our forefathers, my forefather, my great-grandpa, participated in the commercial whaling economy, right? And as that dwindled, you've got the fox skin economy, right? He was one of the first Inupiaq men to buy an engine-fired boat with about 100 fox skins. That's $6,000 in that time. And so, if you look at history, we've always participated in whatever the economy was. And it just so happens over the last 50 years that oil and gas and mining has been that economy. So then you look at how we've structured the federal government or whatever overarching power that be has worked with our indigenous people, and it goes back 120 years or so to the Alaska Native Allotment Act of 1906. And I was remembering a discussion that I had with Delbert Rutherford, who's in the audience, and we talked about the Indian Reorganizational Act of 1934, amended in 1936, to allow us Alaska Natives to be citizens of the United States to an extent. And then you look at the history of NPRA and when President Harding assigned it as a National Petroleum Reserve in 1923. And the injustice that happened when the natural gas field in Barrow in the late 40s, post-World War II, was tapped into. And I was remembering some of the fights that I read about with Eben Hobson Sr., seeing that injustice, that there's natural gas harnessed in the community, but the locals couldn't harness that natural gas until 1963. I used to sit on the Busey local electric co-op board with a member of the audience, and that's the history, right? We've always had to, like Mr. Schutt said, we've always had to participate in whatever game it was to harness the power and authority to make sure that our voice was heard. And you've got the tribal sector, you've got the regional corp and village corp sector that sprung up in the 70s based on the oil discoveries in the 60s and the fight of land ownership and all of that. And then we maximize those authorities to make sure that our interests are protected, both economic interests and subsistence right interests. And I look back to the moratorium on whaling, where if we didn't have the local resources financially to be able to fight an international crowd that was coming in to stop our whaling rights, what would have happened, right? And all of that comes based on the participation of our people in an economy. And so that's the history of what the impacts are and were, and we're living those impacts today, and I would say that we've learned to play the game well, and then enter the political subdivisions of the state, right? You've got organized boroughs, you've got cities. So we've got the quote-unquote trilateral of each of our communities that their voices need to be heard. And because somebody doesn't like the opinion of those voices, doesn't disempower the authority of those voices. And I say that specifically to resource development. When you've got the sign-off of the political subdivision of the state, the deal that was made in the 70s with ANCSA, you've got those people at the table. Then you've got the tribal sector back in the 30s that are saying the same thing. We want willow, or we want red dog, or ambler. You got to listen to those voices, whether you like the opinion or not, right? Because either we're gonna value the indigenous voices and the local representation, or we're not. And there's no splitting of the truth there. So future benefits, future opportunities. I heard a lot about some discussions of economic and socioeconomic well-being and the future of, and concerns of how we're going to pay for those things, like my fellow panelists talked about. All we're doing is we're harnessing the tools that are made available to us to provide for our people, because like I said, we've been here for thousands of years, we're going to be here for thousands of more. Give us the opportunity to protect our local interests, because like Mr. Schutt said, we do it with a balance. There's a balance to be struck, a needle to be thread, whatever analogy you want to use, that I care just as much about the marine mammal resources and the terrestrial game resources, because I eat those, I live on those, that's my sustenance. It costs money to flush my toilet, and set up the infrastructure that allows me to flush my toilet, set up the infrastructure that allows me to have a road, set up the infrastructure that allows me to have a local economy that I can participate in, my kids can participate in, and their kids can participate in, while maintaining the opportunity to continue our cultural activities. So those are the future benefits that I see, a continual striking of the balance, if you will.
Thank you. We're going to begin the audience participation now. You have all submitted some questions for Q&A. We're going to do very brief answers. We have a number of engaging questions. The first one is teed up perfectly by you, Representative Pakatak. How are you including the voices of young people in discussions about topics in your organizations that will impact their future? I'm going to open it up. Whoever would like to start, please do. I'm not going to call on anyone specific.
So I guess to just tee off, making sure the young voices are heard, but making sure the young people understand where we come from, right? Because I remember being a little boy at camp, and by then the borough was stood up. We had the opportunity, we had the infrastructure for flush toilets. I used that example earlier. And I remember being a young boy at camp, and like 10 years old, and my dad making me go dump the honey bucket. I didn't like it, but he forced me to. And little did I know I was learning a lesson there, right? Because as my Ngalu Q said, he's been there and done that, right? That little girl that had to get the water. And so we have to learn where we came from. We have to know where we came from in order to know that we're striking that balance to make sure that our comfortabilities of that lifestyle are left intact, while making sure the environmental side of things is taken care of. And I'd like to make sure people understand the definition of environment. It is the land, it is the animals, but don't forget the people. we're part of that environment. Never forget that. So when we include the young people, we need to make sure that those young people understand the historical aspect of why we stand staunchly for some of the things that we do. So, and I would say I'm a young person too. I'm 28 years old as of a month ago, when my uncle talked about the future, and I almost felt a proverbial passing of the torch, and I appreciate that. So,
Passing of the harpoon. Anything do you guys want to share about shareholders and the advancement of enrollment or getting voices to participate?
Sure, I'd be happy to take that on. Some people in the room probably don't know the structure of ANCSA, so that when the act passed in 1971, there was a hard date of December 18th. If you weren't born on that date, you weren't enrolled originally. Now, Alaska Natives advocated for amendments to ANCSA that allowed enrollment. That happened in 1991, so 6 of the 12 regional corporations, I believe, now are enrolling people born after 1971. So that includes me. Doyon was one of the first, and in our region, I always thank our elders for that decision. It was a very important decision to include our children, my children, and their children into our corporation. I wanted to come back to echo what Josiah said about young people. So I'm just old enough that when I was growing up in the Eastern Interior, that was the last place that non-natives came into the state of Alaska. The old people when I was a kid were the people that grew up before there was any outside influence. So I was very blessed to have those interactions. And one of the things you learned back then was that you didn't really give a lot of input as a young person. You really listened as a young person. And the interaction was sharing that knowledge of cultural things, everything really, from your elders. And I had some elders that I was very close to. I don't have any blood relatives in that part of the world, but I was very fortunate to have a lot of interactions with people who shared many of our cultural traditions and then a lot of learning. Now that doesn't mean we shouldn't listen to our young people, but I think in this day and age, there's a lot of emphasis on hearing young people, and we try to share in our region still that it's very important for our young people to learn, because many things are complex. Many issues are complex, and resource development tends to be one of those set of issues that are the most complex in our state. We're trying to find a balance. We're trying to create local economies so that our communities can sustain themselves while protecting those resources we care so deeply about. So we try our best. We go out and spend lots of times in the communities. We have young shareholders. We have public forums at Doyon for our shareholders to give us input. But again, a lot of times we really need to spend time and educate our young people too.
So, do we see any future changes in ANCSA? Any changes in the law that would impact us? That's one of the questions. It can either just be a yes or a no, or I don't know, or...
Well, I'll just say that ANCSA is a living, breathing law, and the expectation is that it will change over time to meet our needs. I mean, that's what you saw. You mentioned the 1991 amendments. That was critical, and that was, the other thing was that our shares were set to go public, and that would have been a catastrophe. I mean, so
we all wanted to buy ASRC or Nano shares.
Yeah. So the idea is that's a living, breathing document, and from time to time, people take a look at it, make adjustments, and that's to be expected from a law. Yeah.
So this is a global conference, and we're looking at the Arctic. What are the relationships that your entities share, either public policy or in business, with other nations or international business opportunities?
Please go ahead.
When I think about that's a good question. What we try to accomplish from our perspective of a good situational awareness was engaging in these type of activities in different arenas. And lately, it seems to me there's progress here. This is the largest Arctic encounter, I think. And it's a good flavor, of international arenas also, where I'm starting to see that, and at the end of the day, okay, after we sit down like this for a while, we start seeing progress outside. How I said, like, we'd be sitting together, and next thing you know, you're going to another arena, say, ding, here we go, start the progress of it. I'm thankful to be able to see that today. And go back to your question about shareholders. We just incorporated about 200 more shareholders in our Class B shareholders. And the idea behind that is, look, we want to share everything that we have. And the whole thing about our company is growing is providing toolboxes for them to be able to see, hopefully, in the long run. Because at the end of the day, like going to different nations, I like to think of a circle of Arctic Circle nations. And if we can work together as a whole, we can be very strong considering the world today of where we sit today. And I'm really proud of the fact that I really have fun going before a lot of people and just share what we're seeing today. At the end of the day, we're really standing on our resources too. Thank you.
Can I add one thing to that? Sure. We have a broad audience. It's unusual in Anchorage to have people from so many different places. And one of the things Doyon's been working on for a long time is some Arctic policy. Obviously, the line that was drawn on the eastern border of Alaska with Canada is kind of artificial with our people, and so we have a lot of relatives on the other side. And as we engaged on some of this Arctic policy, what we realized is that across the world, in our view, Arctic policy was driven from north to south relationships. And what we really need to focus on is east to west, because we, across the Arctic, have relatives and we face the same issues in Arctic nations, regardless of those boundaries. But the policy, especially in the United States, is not on an east-west basis. It's a north-south basis. It makes it a hard border for Canada, for example, for us. And that should be the easiest border to do business across, to travel across, to do everything we need to do to collaborate with our relatives and neighbors across the border. And it's not the easiest. So we have a lot of work to do in this area.
And I'll jump in on that one as well, if that's all right. So similar, right? The borders were slapped on top of our people. So the Inuit homeland, Inuit Nunat, goes from Chukotka in Russia all the way across the Arctic to Greenland. And those are, our homeland is a very real place where we've got real connections. We've got people who live in our community whose family historically come from across the ocean, and maybe they decided to move there some years ago when they were after being there for a cultural festival. So those relationships are still so real to us, and even today, my own children's father's from Greenland, so those are just very real. I think you mentioned the business arrangements, but there are also really other important arrangements that speak to our economies and our indigenous economies, and there's our natural resources cross borders. So on the Chukotka side, you've got the U.S.-Russia treaty on the Alaska Chukotka polar bear population. You've got the migratory bird treaty. You've got all different treaties across the Arctic that speak to collaboration and protecting of species so that our communities can continue to subsist off them as we have for many years. I mean, NANA's Arctic policy portfolio is really important to us because, again, we need to be in that space where Arctic policy is being developed. Our VP of Lands, Liz Carvalho over there, she's on the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, and we're really grateful for that. We're also grateful for the work of the Inuit Circumpolar Council that represents, our Inuit homelands, and so we participate in that. And of course, ICC has a seat on the Arctic Council where those really, as an observer, where those conversations are had. And the Arctic is just, you mentioned national security. I want to underscore that because we are of such strategic importance to the security of this nation. We're also of critical importance when it comes to transitioning to the green economy and the development of those essential minerals that are absolutely necessary, especially as the catastrophe in Russia is showing us how vulnerable we are. And so we just We take our role as stewards of the Arctic and people who have something to contribute very seriously. Yeah. So I love that question. Thank you, whoever
You
asked
get to
it.
wrap it up.
Just a very brief one. I'm glad you mentioned Greenland. You know, I'm from a region called Utukaqamit. We have roots in that. And having said that, you know, there's some folks in Greenland that have roots from Utukaq. They consider Utukaqamiurunga. I'm from Utukaq. Yeah, all the way across the region. Prove to the point of what we're talking about. Thank you.
Maybe your husband is your long-lost cousin?
Oh, don't go showing our village now.
I gotta make them laugh, keep them awake.
Humor is certainly a significant portion of our culture. Well, thank you to the panelists. It's been a great discussion. There were many questions we did not get to, which are thoughtful and important, and I know we all love the opportunity to have these discussions. So please grab one of the panelists, grab somebody else within entities that you're interested in having a conversation with. Thank you again to AES and Rachel and your team, and look forward to visiting with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.